writing just to get comfortable with the process. And sometimes I don't think enough writers do this. Whereas painters, when they're painting, they know that some of their first attempts are not meant to be for human consumption. I think a lot of writers sometimes feel so sacred about the printed word that once they've written it down, they think it's perfect as is, and then they continue on. And for me, I wrote about 200 pages of comic book script just to get comfortable with the process, and then threw it all away. And so the first story that I did never actually appeared anywhere. The second one I did, though, was one called Astronaut Dad. And it ended up being about a 144-page graphic novel. It was meant to be a self-contained book. The funny thing about this is, and I'm going to share this real quick, Astronaut Dad, the first part of it has come out last year or 2 years ago. The second volume of it is coming out this summer. So literally one of the things that I wrote first is coming out most recently. And by some quirk of publishing, everything that I've done is coming out in reverse order. So whenever people tell me that my stuff's getting better and better, it really scares me because it's not the order I wrote it in. But at the same time, this Astronaut Dad went through about 3 different rewrites. I had some other friends who are also comic book writers who I bribed them. I offered to design their website in exchange for editing chores, and so they helped me. So even though this was the first thing I wrote, it was also the thing that has gone through the most revising and revision process of it. The thing that I really love about this book is I love stories that surprise you with what they're about. I mean, I think the unfortunate thing about Hollywood nowadays is you watch the preview and you pretty much know what the movie's about before you even go see it. I mean, was anyone really surprised with how Bride Wars ended? I mean, it's just, we get no surprises in storytelling. But then again, if you look at some of the great storytellers throughout history, sometimes the story goes in a completely different direction than what you expected. And we were talking about Charles Dickens earlier. I think, look at Great Expectations. I mean, that's a story that did not go in the direction that I think anyone thought it would go. And I love stories that do that. And for this one, I've written the first book. The second one is coming out, and I'm excited to see how people respond to it, because the first volume is about, childhood and growing up in the suburbs and the family, and it's very docile and very saccharine in its own way. The second book opens up with the mother having a miscarriage, and it starts off that the father was not there when the family really needed him. And so the story is really about how people tend to idolize their parents, and as they get older, they begin to put their parents in perspective, going from hero to villain to something in between. And the story goes in that direction, but it doesn't hit there until the second part. I've got another book called Karma Incorporated that's the same way. And anyone who says it's a really funny book, it's because they haven't read the last issue, because it goes in a completely different direction. But this was the first one I did. Oddly enough, it took me about 5 years to actually get it in print. Move to the next one. There we go. This is actually the first thing that ever saw print, and it's pretty indicative. The opening page is pretty indicative of a theme that I'm very interested in, which is family crisis and sort of those suburban dystopia stories. Opening panel, the first page was an SUV in flames, and if ever there was a single image for suburban dystopia, a flaming SUV seemed to be like the real key there. This was a mini comic that I did, and it was a great way for me to start off because I wasn't getting published. There were no publishers who cared or were interested in me. But to self-publish, to work with an artist and pay him and put it out myself, it's all me, and I did exactly what I wanted to do. I told the story exactly what I wanted to tell it, and it came out this way, and I'm pretty happy with it. But dealing with issues of family in crisis, which already was starting in Astronaut Dad, coming in through Some Other Day, which is this mini comic. We'll go to the next one. After that, as I said, I know that all this stuff is too small for you to read. I have it up there to prove that I wrote it. Yeah.
The text that you have up there, did it accompany it? Is that the way it looked like in the novel, or in the?
Thankfully, no.
I wanted to make.
Yeah, as a writer, I mean, no one ever sees, as a script writer, no one ever sees what I do, if, ideally.
No, except for the, artists or Hollywood people, production people, etc.
Yeah, I mean, we get to hide behind other people's work, and that's the way it should be. I mean, depending on the artist that I've worked with, and I've got a great example in just a few slides, some artists will follow very closely to your descriptions, and you need to script it, very tightly. Other artists you work with, it may be just very vague sort of developments, and sometimes it's not a good thing if they follow you word for word, because sometimes, and it's good to have that kind of back and forth feedback. After I did the mini comic, I started doing some short stories with some different anthologies, and for anyone that's thinking about breaking into comics, honestly, short stories and anthologies are usually the way that most people go, because it's hard to get an artist to commit to you for 140 pages, but you can probably find an artist who will want to work with you for 5 pages, or for 8 pages, or for 2 pages, depending on what you want to do. And this is some stuff that I did for a Dead at 17 rough cut, and we'll just kind of zip through some of this stuff. This was another one that I did for Western Tales of Terror. Worked with a local guy named Benjamin Hall. Benjamin Hall was really great because every script that I sent him, he's like, yeah, this looks good, but we're going to do it this way. And, looking back at some of the changes that he made to my script taught me so much about working with an artist. And that's one thing that I think a lot of comic book writers need to learn. They need to learn how to work with someone else. And he taught me how comic book artists think. And he's like, you know what, this panel doesn't work here at the end of this page. We need to put this panel up here. Or this single image that you have is great, but let's break it down into 4 images. And you can't really read it here, but the repeating of the piano keys is not anything that I had in the script there. I really just had the man playing, and then like a close-up of his scared face, and then like him playing, pulling back. And graphically, this is much more interesting than what I had up on the page. So,
who has the power, if you will? Because I mean, it depends on your perspective, of course. But
yeah.
Writers in traditional novels and whatnot, the writer seems to have all the power, and the editor is the one who is behind the scenes.
Oh, Christian?
Now you have the artists who have the power, but yet the writing is essential to the story.
Here's my thought on it. I think that a good writer will give vision and direction to the artist, but when it's a good relationship, the writer needs to step out of the way. And at that point, you act almost as like a guide and a counselor to the artist, and let them, and I've had artists who come back to me and they're like, dude, this is not happening, I need to do something else. I'm like, okay, let's rework it and do something.
And it's the same way in writing. When you write something and you work with a great editor, the great editor is always the one that makes the great writer. The writer may not admit that, but that's the relationship, and it's the same kind of relationship that you have here.
Yeah. If I can interject for a brief moment, in comics it seems like the editor is kind of a schedule keeper more than anything else.
We need editors who are good editors, but they don't exist.
He will put writers with artists that he thinks will fit, and he, I guess, is responsible for who he picks as an artist. Usually the writer is present first. The editor will then be responsible for picking the illustrator, and then thus kind of setting the tone. Then after that, it's kind of just people wrangling and just getting things in on time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I've had some artists that I've worked with who feel a real attachment to the project we're working on, and they get like, they've got this ownership. But I've got other people I've worked with who, after they're done with it, they're done and they're on to the next thing. And so, I don't know. It's a tricky thing. I think that, but with any great writer, it's like with making a movie, you don't want the screenwriter like poking the director every other day going, hey, you need to, and so honestly, I kind of view the artist as like, in many ways, the director, and the script writer is like the player, the screenwriter. You pass it off and you trust them, and kind of work with them. Let's go to the next one. Okay, I was going to show you, this is some stuff that, like all good writers, I have a whole bunch of stuff that is never going to see the light of day. I got really ambitious and thought it would be cool to write a story, a non-fiction account of Jack Ruby's 3 days from the point that Kennedy was shot to the time that he shot Lee Harvey Oswald. I picked up a bunch of books, I did a lot of research, I followed his Warren Commission testimony as sort of the basis for how I was going to tell it. No conspiracy theories or anything. It was going to be, and anyway, I found out that nonfiction is really hard. It was hard to, believe it or not,